Wolverine has one of the weirdest trilogies I've ever seen. I mean, how many trilogies do you know that start out with one of the worst superhero movies ever made and end with one of the best? And one result of those two extremes is that a certain middle chapter never gets talked about, a little 2013 film simply titled
The Wolverine.
I'm not kidding, this movie is so widely disregarded that apparently even its own studio can't be bothered to properly represent it. I mean, look at the official X-Men DVD box set that I've got just here. X-Men Wolverine. Have you ever seen an official DVD box set that gets the title of the movie wrong? But let's take a look and see why nobody cares to remember this film and if there was anything worth remembering to begin with. So when I went back to rewatch this movie, it was the first time I had watched an X-Men film since the series ended. Kinda. I mean, can you blame me? It was 2020, we had bigger things to worry about. But even after that time away, the opening 20 minutes of this movie made me remember exactly what made Wolverine such a compelling character. The movie opens with this awesome flashback scene showing him being held as a prisoner of war in a Nagasaki camp that's being evacuated because of... We see him being held in isolation unlike the other prisoners, and we see that he's the only one who's not panicking because he knows he'll ultimately be fine.
I'd hurry if I were you.
But just as the bomb goes off, we see one remaining officer get rescued by Wolverine, shielding him from the blast. In just a couple of minutes, and with very little dialogue, this movie demonstrates exactly what makes Wolverine such an interesting character. It shows how his near immortality has given him such a long and experienced history, being seen as a formidable fighter over generations of large-scale wars and witnessing major turning points in human history firsthand, to the point where it's all just something that he's used to.
How's a B-29, Bob? There's no outrunning what's coming.
And despite his gruff exterior and even gruff interior, he still has a sense of heroism and compassion, choosing to protect an enemy soldier even at his own cost. Not to mention demonstrating the insane extent of his healing factor that even arguably the most powerful weapon in the world at the time can't bring him down, even if it takes an extreme, albeit temporary toll. Then we're given a very brief dream sequence of Logan meeting Jean Grey, his former love interest whom he reluctantly killed not too long ago. Side note, I do actually really appreciate how this movie does follow up on Wolverine's journey after X-Men The Last Stand. It would be so easy for them to want to just sweep one of the series' most disliked films under the rug and just not acknowledge it.
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
But no, this franchise did stick to that storyline, and for good reason. Logan made a huge personal sacrifice, killing the love of his life for the good of the world. Of course it's something that's going to haunt him and have him wondering what he's even supposed to do now.
Can you stay?
You know I can't.
No, I'm so sorry.
And all of what I've mentioned sets up a great amount of context for the following sequences. Throughout the next few scenes, we get a fairly grounded and quieter story than most superhero movies, where we see Logan living in the woods and wandering around a nearby town. And this is where we see that seemingly endless life that Wolverine has being given some actual perspective. Because Wolverine has lived through generations, it stands to reason that he would eventually outlive his own sense of purpose. If everyone he's ever loved will just die around him and everything he set out to do is come and gone, it makes sense that he would just become a drifter for lack of anything better to do. But he's not completely without purpose, as we see him confronting an illegal hunter using poison arrows to a dangerously reckless degree.
Instead of dropping a lethal dose, it bled into the bear, made him crazy, killed 5 people.
And this scene highlights a lot of why Hugh Jackman was such a brilliant casting choice for Wolverine, to the point where, even after being given a chance to recast, Marvel still haven't.
They're gonna make him do this till he's 90.
Put simply, this guy knows how to play a man with decades of blood on his hands and an equal amount of grief and trauma to process. He plays the role with such an understated intensity where he clearly has a lot of pent-up aggression and determination for punishing bad people, even if 100 years of practice have given him an almost casual sense of emotional restraint as he does it.
Whoever shot it didn't have the wind or the balls to track the animal properly and put it out of its misery.
Unfortunately, that opening sequence is about as far as my praise for the storytelling will go. While Wolverine is characterized really well, all things considered, he's just not used in an engaging plot. While we get involves Wolverine being flown into Japan to assist the family of that officer from Nagasaki named Yoshida, And the plot from there on out revolves around his granddaughter Mariko being targeted by the Yakuza, and Wolverine taking her into hiding while unraveling a massive conspiracy involving the rest of the family. This is where the movie starts losing me for a number of reasons. The first of which being, it really doesn't feel like Logan has any personal stakes in this story. Yoshida is intended to be someone who developed a mutual respect for Wolverine after the experience they survived together, but their bond is really only implied to have developed off-screen, and even what we do see doesn't look like they spent all that long together. As for his granddaughter and the rest of his family, these are characters that Logan has really only just met and hasn't had a chance to be emotionally invested in helping aside from just general compassion. The only characters with personal stakes for most of the story are the family members themselves, but they're not particularly interesting either. They're very rarely shown to have any in-depth emotional scenes together, or even on their own, which would make them sympathetic or likable. Many of their interactions with Logan basically amount to little more than just plot exposition about the family without making the audience actually care about that family. They eventually do try to give Logan something personal to fight for by having him and Mariko become a couple, giving him a reason to be invested in her safety. It's a fine idea in that it rekindles Logan's sense of value in his life and could also help him to heal from the trauma of losing Jean. But because Mariko isn't that interesting of a character in general, she makes for a pretty lackluster love interest for Logan. In fact, they have so little chemistry with each other that if they didn't kiss in this scene, I would honestly just think that their relationship was purely platonic, because their feelings for each other are pretty much completely undetectable. And there are so many different family members and all of them are so incredibly bland, it makes the plot genuinely difficult to follow because I keep forgetting which character is which and what their roles in the story actually are. Aside from the family, the plot has one more component that I haven't touched on yet, which is that for a lot of the movie, Wolverine's healing factor has been compromised. And this is something I'm in slightly two minds about. Conceptually, I'm fine with it. I think it's a good way of creating tension throughout the plot in that Logan could actually be killed. My problem is, it's not something that he ends up struggling with in any meaningful way, at least not for the majority of the movie. It usually just amounts to him wincing at a few cuts and bruises during fairly quiet moments in the plot where he's not in any immediate danger. There's one point where he faints while he and Mariko are hiding out. But then the scene just cuts to him waking up the next day to find that Mariko solved the problem off screen.
He's a veterinarian.
Great, I wish every obstacle in a movie could be solved while the main character is taking a nap. You know, there's a scene later on in the climax where Logan gets knocked out and kidnapped. Imagine if he passed out and then the movie just cut to him waking up to find Mariko, who tells him, "Yeah, I talked things out with the bad guys, they let us go." And while the healing factor is technically useful for giving Wolverine a fail state, it doesn't really serve any tangible role in the action scenes outside of that. There aren't many moments where he's shown to be physically struggling during a fight, or like his lack of healing is making him significantly weaker. And just in general, the action scenes are fine, but not really anything special. That is except for one scene about 45 minutes into the movie where out of nowhere it just completely shoots up in quality. The scene shows Wolverine fighting a group of Yakuza members on the top of a bullet train, all of them trying to fight each other off while keeping a grip on the train. It's an inherently engaging location for a fight, not only because of the blistering speed of the city whizzing by, but also because of how we see the characters are forced to fight. Every attack these characters make, they're risking flying off the train, not to mention the slight floatiness of their movements due to the wind and the signs and the other structures built around the track that they have to lose their footing to dodge, which adds to the lack of control that these characters are forced to work within. And the scene culminates with Wolverine learning to use that environment to his advantage, tricking one of them into jumping into a sign and using his momentum to lunge himself toward the final bad guy. Not only is it a great premise for a fight, but it shows a progression from our main character as he takes the less than ideal location and over the course of the battle learns to use it to his benefit in creative ways. It's a genuinely great moment, and I'm sad the other action scenes don't seem to live up to that. One thought that crossed my mind while watching is that the actual quality of the movie aside, there's very little reason to go back and actually watch it anymore. I know this isn't the movie's fault, but a lot of the themes of this film were also covered later on in Logan. Suffering from grief and feeling a lack of purpose in his life, having to fight without an effective healing factor, having to care for a female stranger who he eventually grows to care deeply for. These are all things that were done in way more depth and way more compellingly in Logan, and the Wolverine doesn't have enough going for it in its own merits to not be obsolete at this point. But I don't think that's the only reason why nobody ever talks about this movie in any capacity. And I think there's a bigger reason which has honestly just been hiding in plain sight all along. Put it this way, you remember X-Men Origins Wolverine? Of course you do, it's one of the worst superhero movies ever made. For better or worse, that's a reputation that sticks. But have you ever noticed that whenever people talk about that movie, they're almost always talking about that film's version of Deadpool? I don't blame them, it is a fundamentally bad take on the character, but it's very rare that anything else about that movie ever gets discussed. And I think really that's because the movie outside of that just isn't very interesting. It's bad, but not the baffling kind of bad that that one element gave us. The Wolverine is essentially just Origins but without Deadpool, and Logan without the emotional depth. It's not fascinatingly bad enough or narratively innovative enough to be worth paying much attention to. I think that's why this movie seems to be mostly forgotten. Admittedly, that's just speculation on my part, but it doesn't seem wrong that people's reactions to this trilogy seem to be... Logan? Oh yeah, remember how Wolverine's heroic sacrifice was such an emotionally powerful ending for his character? X-Men Origins? Oh yeah, remember how they took a character that was literally nicknamed the Merc with a Mouth and gave him no fucking mouth? The Wolverine? Oh yeah, remember how all the characters and struggles that Logan faces in that movie are completely forgettable? No? Okay, I guess that makes sense. Hey, Bob. You're not f***ing subscribed to my Patreon. Get the f*** over there for just $1.50 a month, and you'll get to see all my f***ing videos before anyone else. You'll also get a shout out at the end of every video and access to alternate thumbnails I made during production. Click the link in the description, you son of a bitch, before I f***ing shove. No, calm down. I know we don't have the Patreon support, but let's not get the video demonetized as well. Look, just click the link below if you want to. Or if you don't, fair enough, but we'd really appreciate it.